Tonight on NewsWatch, deadly shooting at Fort Hood. More on the gunman and what could have led him to open fire.
Plus, as the push for peace continues in the Middle East, a look at a slightly different threat facing the Israeli military.
And how political correctness could be putting Sweden's successful economy in jeopardy. All this and more tonight on NewsWatch. Another tragedy for the community of Fort Hood. Good evening. I'm Mark Martin.
And I'm Wendy Griffith. A shooting at the Fort Hood military base Wednesday left 3 soldiers dead and 16 others wounded. Tonight, officials are learning more about the man behind that shooting. Caitlin Burke joins us now with more on the investigation. Caitlin.
That's right, Wendy. Investigators do know more about the suspect tonight. They know he'd been evaluated for post-traumatic stress disorder, and he was receiving treatment for depression and anxiety. But there's still no answers to the question of why he started shooting in the first place.
Nearly 5 years after the deadliest mass shooting ever at a U.S. military base, Fort Hood is once again in mourning.
The folks there have sacrificed so much on behalf of our freedom. Many of the people there have been through multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. They serve with valor and they serve with distinction. And when they're at their home base, they need to feel safe.
The gunman in Wednesday's shooting has been identified as 34-year-old Army Specialist Ivan Lopez. Army officials say he walked into a command building wearing his fatigues and carrying a handgun and started shooting. He then got into his car and drove to another building, where he continued his rampage.
I heard gunshots. At that point, I was scared.
Lopez was an active duty soldier and truck driver. He served in Iraq for 4 months back in 2011, but according to military officials, he never engaged in combat. Though he wasn't injured in fighting, Lopez did self-report a traumatic brain injury. He was being treated for depression, anxiety, and problems sleeping, as well as being evaluated for post-traumatic stress disorder. Meanwhile, Lopez's neighbors are surprised by the attack, saying he seemed normal and happy.
He seemed like a pretty good guy. I mean, he was always smiling and waving whenever I saw him. So I didn't think anything strange or unusual.
The shooting has renewed calls for an end to gun restrictions for soldiers on base. Lawmakers, as well as survivors of the 2009 shooting, say the attacks could have been stopped sooner if others on base had their weapons by their side.
If you have a weapon and you're on base, it's supposed to be registered on base. We'll have to re-examine all of those programs and see if there were any gaps.
Army officials did say that many of the procedures put in place after the 2009 shooting kept this one from being much worse.
And as we continue to learn more about the shooter, a lot of attention is focusing on his mental state, as we just heard in your report. Mental health issues are a big concern among those in the military, aren't they?
They are. Just last month, a study published in an American Medical Association journal found nearly 1 in 5 soldiers suffered from a common mental illness like depression before even entering the service. So it's something that the military has been paying a lot of attention to recently.
All right, Caitlin, we appreciate your report. Thanks so much.
Linda Mintle is the chair of behavioral health at the College of Osteopathic Medicine at Liberty University, and she joins us now with more. Linda, as we've reported, the shooter said he had a traumatic brain injury. What are some side effects of TBI?
I think it's important, Mark, to remember that he said he self-diagnosed that. But TBI is one of those common things that we are seeing more and more with people who come back from war. And one of the side effects is that it affects a part of the prefrontal lobe of the brain, which has to do with self-control. So sometimes there's some impulsivity that's associated with that, irritability, and irritability can happen because of chronic headaches and dizziness and difficulty getting along with people. So it does impact your personal relationships and your ability sometimes to cope. Over time, what can happen with that is because of the chronicness of that condition, people can become suicidal.
Now, it was also being determined if he was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of soldiers, as you know, who come home from war experience PTSD, but most don't turn violent. Talk about that.
That's absolutely correct. And it is true that whenever a soldier comes home, they are screened for PTSD. And you're right, it's a fear-based disorder. It's an emotional disorder. It's one of those DSM-5 disorders that we talk about in psychiatry. So it is one of those disorders that has to do with the emotional. It's fear-based in that you're constantly on edge, you're hypervigilant, but you don't tend to get violent with PTSD. Instead, people have more trouble with isolation and relationships and feeling that fear and those flashbacks and those nightmares and those triggers that sometimes make them afraid. So violence is not typically associated with that disorder.
How is PTSD treated?
PTSD is treated with something called cognitive behavior therapy, also something called prolonged exposure therapy, in which they deal with the symptoms and they reduce those symptoms. Sometimes a technique called EMDR is used, and also at times medication. Typically the more like antidepressant medications are used to treat this.
Well, why do you think mental health issues are so prevalent in the military?
You know, I've worked with a lot of military at the Norfolk Naval Base over my time. And one of the things that you know is that there's a lot of stress on families. There's a lot of deployment. And of course, in wartime, there's all the issues that are associated with war. Military families really deal with a lot. And I want to say that the military does a great job at providing resources if people will use them. But if you have those additional stresses that the military creates just by fact of the type of profession it is, and you don't have good coping skills, and you have anger issues that have never been resolved, or you have problematic relationships, intimate partner violence is one of the things that we see sometimes among military families. People just can't cope. Then those stresses can exacerbate the conditions in our veterans or in our active duty people. But again, I just want to stress that there is help, and the military does a fabulous job of providing that help if people will seek it.
All right, great. Well, Dr. Linda Mental, thanks so much for your insights. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
15 to 20% of customers signed up under Obamacare aren't paying their first premiums, which means they're not covered under the plans. The National Journal reports that data comes from one of the nation's largest insurers, Blue Cross Blue Shield. So while the Obama administration says slightly more than 7 million people have signed up, the insurer's numbers mean only around 6 million people have coverage.
Turning overseas, Lebanon is now home to more than 1 million Syrian refugees. That's equivalent to nearly a fourth of the entire Lebanese population. The United Nations says it's causing a devastating strain on the country. As the Syrian civil war continues, refugees are not just fleeing to Lebanon. Bordering countries, including Jordan, Turkey, Iraq, and Egypt, are also housing those trying to escape the violence. The UN says there are more than 2.5 million Syrian refugees. And as the number continues to rise, fears of sectarian fighting are spreading across the region.
Israel says it won't release a fourth group of Palestinian prisoners, a move that could put peace talk negotiations in further jeopardy. Israel made that announcement today in response to a Palestinian push to gain more recognition at the United Nations. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says he will continue to encourage Israeli and Palestinian leaders to continue the talks no matter what. Kerry says, quote, "You can facilitate, you can push, you can nudge, but the parties themselves have to make fundamental decisions and compromises." Well, with a constant threat of violence, Israel's security forces are always prepared for enemy attacks. But right now, they're also dealing with an issue a little closer to home.
Every migration season, the Israeli Air Force has to work around a sky full of birds. Chris Mitchell has that story from Jerusalem.
500 million birds migrate twice a year through Israel, the only land bridge between Eurasia in the north and Africa in the south.
The soaring birds are the main problem for the Air Force because soaring birds are usually big birds, big and heavy birds. And hitting a big and heavy bird, this is really something you don't want to experience.
Israel has the heaviest bird migration in the world and a very large air force that trains in a tiny airspace. That's why there's such a big conflict between the birds and the planes. Major Oded Ovadia commands the IAF Birdwatching and Flight Safety Department. He says the Israeli Air Force suffers up to 250 bird strikes a year and has lost a number of planes over the years. Fortunately, things have improved recently.
The main change was in the beginning of the 80s when we implemented regulations on low-level flights during migration season.
Like other countries, Ovadia says, Israel manages the bird habitats at air bases, chasing away unwanted birds. They also use radar to locate migrating birds.
The real-time warning system is very unique to this country. I don't know other country that try and follow birds during migration and give real-time warnings to aircrafts en route.
Tracking radar could have made a tremendous difference in 2009 and what became known as the miracle on the Hudson. U.S. Airways Flight 1549 ran into a flock of Canadian geese shortly after taking off from LaGuardia Airport.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro? We're going to be in the Hudson.
The plane lost engine thrust, turned back, and ended up ditching in the Hudson River. All 155 passengers and crew evacuated safely. Lieutenant Leor Daron is a tower commander at the Hatzor Air Force Base near Ashdod.
Probably the birds will go through the path either north to south or the other way. And also there's the flocks of birds on the runway itself. They stay there, and when the planes take off, they just fly in the air, and it's really jeopardized the colliding with the planes.
Daron must guide the planes to safety.
We take the aircrafts from different paths so they won't collide with the bird migration here. We can do that with a radar that we see the flocks of birds in the control tower region, and we take the planes to landing in a safety way.
It's even tougher at night with no visibility. And what do they do if they can't see?
We just pray that they won't collide each other.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Coming up, time to soak up some sun. A new study looks at the benefits of vitamin D.
You had a grandpa named Pop, right?
They died when I was your age.
I saw him in heaven.
What if an ordinary boy...
Is this him?
That's Pop.
Your son had a near-death experience.
Discovered the answer to life's most extraordinary question.
Do you think my son went to heaven?
He told me everything was all right.
Based on the incredible true story.
We all want to be supportive.
I want to believe him. But everything he talks about is impossible.
Will you believe?
You saw heaven? It's beautiful.
Heaven is for real. See it this Easter. Rated PG.
I was having some pains between my shoulder blades. At that point, everything changed. Diagnosis, pancreatic cancer. First, there was prayer. The second is to fight. As soon as we walked through those doors at Cancer Treatment Centers of America, all my anxiety left. The pastoral care here is based on the Bible, based on the Word of God, just as it is at our own church.
When you combine the great medicine with the spiritual resources we have, it provides the patients with something that really can make a difference.
You got a pastor right there on staff praying with patients, and whether it be scripture or whether it just be a word of encouragement to say, God's got this.
If you or someone you love is fighting complex or advanced stage cancer, go to cancercenter.com/faith. You'll learn how our treatment results compare to national averages and see a list of insurance plans with which we've worked. Advanced medicine and technology, the warm embrace of the Spirit.
I firmly believe God led me here.
Call or go to cancercenter.com. Cancer Treatment Centers of America. Care that never quits. Appointments available now.
You had a grandpa named Pop, right?
They died when I was your age.
I saw him in heaven.
What if an ordinary boy...
Is this him?
That's Pop.
Your son had a near-death experience.
Discovered the answer to life's most extraordinary question.
Do you think my son went to heaven?
He told me everything was all right.
Based on the incredible true story.
We all want to be supportive.
I want to believe him. But everything he talks about is impossible.
Will you believe?
You saw heaven? It's beautiful.
Heaven is for real. See it this Easter. Rated PG.
In health news tonight, one of the easiest ways Americans can take care of themselves is by doing something few are actually doing, and that's getting enough vitamin D.
Yeah, and it's crucial for fighting disease. As Lori Johnson tells us, a lack of it can lead to serious health problems.
Vitamin D, we get it from the sun, from some foods, and from supplements. But despite its abundant availability, an estimated 2/3 of Americans aren't getting enough. And that spells real trouble. A major new study of nearly 1 million people finds the lower your vitamin D levels, the higher your risk for certain diseases, including a 35% increased risk of death from heart disease and a 14% increased risk of death from cancer. Vitamin D is nicknamed the sunshine nutrient because our bodies actually produce it when our skin is exposed to sunlight. To get enough vitamin D from the sun, doctors recommend exposing as much unprotected skin as possible, so no sunscreen, spread out over just an hour or two a week. To protect against skin cancer, make sure you don't overdo your sun exposure. If your skin turns pink, you've been out too long. If you can't or don't want to get your vitamin D from the sun, some foods are rich in it, such as salmon, mushrooms, fortified dairy, and kale. But even they might not contain all the D you need.
Food sources are really limited, so it's best for most people to take a supplement.
Choose vitamin D3. It makes your heart healthy, improves your immune system, boosts your mood, and since you need it to absorb calcium, it strengthens your bones. But beware, even if you take vitamin D, certain things lower it from your system, such as smoking, obesity, and inflammation, which comes from things like eating too much sugar and trans fats. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Thanks, Lori. Well, eating more fruits and vegetables can help you live longer, and the more you eat them, the better off you'll be. That's the conclusion of a major study that followed more than 65,000 people in Britain. Eating 7 or more servings a day cut the risk of early death by 42%. People who ate fewer servings also saw their chances of living longer increased, although not as much, and vegetables were found to have more benefits than fruit. The study's lead author says the clear message here is that the more fruit and vegetables you eat, the less likely you are to die at any age.
Up next, why some say the successful Swedish model of governing is now broken.
This is a national healthcare alert from the Health Hotline. If you, a family member, or a loved one suffers from knee pain and have Medicare as your primary insurance, we've got great news. You could qualify for a pain-relieving knee brace at little or no cost to you. Get free delivery, and all the paperwork is handled by our accredited suppliers at no charge to you. If you're on Medicare and have knee pain, don't wait. You may qualify to immediately receive a pain-relieving brace at little or no cost. Friendly agents are standing by 24/7 to help you. Call the Health Hotline right now for details toll-free. Our friendly representatives are standing by now to take your call. We also have other pain-relieving braces available for shoulder, ankle, and your back. You may be eligible to receive these items and more at little or no cost to you as well. Call right now for details toll-free.
Operators are standing by. Call 855-740-8143. That's 855-740-8143. Again, 855-740-8143. That's 855-740-8143.
Announcing an important breakthrough in healthcare that can benefit everyone. If you or anyone you love needs affordable health insurance, regardless of a pre-existing medical condition, call Quick Insurance 123 today and get the immediate relief you deserve. Quick Insurance 123 was created to provide affordable health insurance to all uninsured Americans, with or without pre-existing conditions. This is not a discount card. This is a real insurance program that lets you choose from many affordable health plans, with access to doctors, hospitals, emergency services, and more. So call the number on your screen now and get the health coverage you need just for calling. As a special bonus, we'll send you a free prescription savings card that could save you up to 85% on your prescriptions. That's right, you could save up to 85% on your prescriptions just for calling. Call Quick Insurance 123 to find out how you can get affordable health insurance and receive your free prescription savings card just for calling. Don't wait. Getting a free quote is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Call today.
Welcome back. Conservative economic policies and a large liberal welfare state. Together they make what's known as the Swedish model.
Yeah, we're not talking about a magazine model, right? But some people call it a success. But as Dale Hurd reports in tonight's Focus Report, others warn that Sweden has a dark side ruled by political correctness.
When President Obama visited Sweden last year, he expressed his admiration for the Swedish model
And that should make Americans nervous, because a United Nations report says Sweden will be a third world nation in about 15 years, below Libya and Bulgaria. Sweden is a society that believes it is racing into the future, but critics warn that it's racing to the bottom. Welcome to Utopia, also known as Sweden. Sweden has been a laboratory of social experiments. Swedish leaders believe they're building the perfect society. And Sweden has been compared to a couple of nations which also tried to build perfect societies, North Korea and the Soviet Union. If you don't like how Utopia is being built here, you won't be shot like in North Korea, but your life could become very unpleasant very quickly.
Hallå, hallå. Jimmy Fredriksson från Expressen.
Jimmy Fredriksson? Jaha du.
This is a journalist from one of Sweden's leading tabloids confronting a Swede at his home. The man, a professor, made what he thought were anonymous negative comments on a website about immigrant problems in Sweden. But left-wing hackers helped the newspaper track him down and others like him, so that they could be exposed before the whole nation as racist. This man, a manager, was fired because of it. Sweden's leftist establishment and media believe a cornerstone of their perfect society is multiculturalism, large-scale immigration from some of the poorest, most backward nations on earth. And Swedes who disagree with that plan risk being labeled racist, fascist, even Nazi.
The rules of the game in Sweden is to avoid being hostile to immigration. It's the most important point to prove that you're friendly towards foreigners, you're friendly towards immigration.
Danish journalist Mikael Jalving is author of the book Absolute Sweden.
It's all about whether or not you can be said to be hostile to immigration. Once that is proven, you're out of the game.
It doesn't matter if Sweden's immigration model is failing miserably, if test scores in Swedish schools are plummeting, or if crime in some areas has skyrocketed. Immigrants burned the Stockholm suburb of Husby for over a week last year. Many Jews now live in fear of attacks by Muslim immigrants and are leaving. This former journalist for Swedish radio left last year and returned to her native Somalia. She told Swedish television that Mogadishu was safer than the immigrant suburbs in Stockholm. And forget about an American-style melting pot in which immigrants will someday learn to become Swedish. That's a racist idea too. Jalving says Swedes are supposed to learn from immigrants and not the other way around.
Assimilation is completely out of the question.
Who says assimilation is completely out of the question?
Everybody in all mainstream political parties and media and platforms would laugh about the word assimilation is a Nazi word in Sweden.
We talked to several journalists who described a Stalinist-style atmosphere in Sweden, in which citizens are now afraid of saying anything that might get them labeled in the media as racist.
They point at you and say you're a racist. Then you will have no career, no job, you might lose your family.
Swedish journalist Ingrid Carlqvist and Danish journalist Lars Hedegaard run the online newspaper Dispatch International, which covers issues like immigration that the mainstream media in Sweden ignores. But Carlqvist says their plan for a traditional newspaper failed because Swedes were too scared to have the paper delivered to their homes.
Because what if the mailman saw that you had this newspaper? What if your neighbor saw it? Then they might think that you are a racist or that you hate Muslims.
So we thought we could sort of make an impact. We still think we can, but it's tough going.
Dispatch International now hangs on through donations. Sweden has become a nation where some viewpoints are simply too risky to even read.
What wise Swedish parents do nowadays is to advise their kids not to interfere in the public discussion, not to express so-called radical ideas about this or that.
Because why? Why do they advise them?
Because they're afraid. Whether or not this is...
kids won't get work?
Yeah, it'll harm them.
That is a very bad situation because you live then in a country where you cannot solve any problems. You cannot even mention the problems.
Hedegaard, a Dane, was nearly killed last year in Copenhagen by an immigrant who came to his door and fired a gun at him. Carlqvist, a Swede, has decided to leave Sweden because of the persecution of those who dissent. Sweden is not going to become a third world nation tomorrow, But according to one report, one day it will.
We had a perfectly good country, a rich country, a nice country, and in a few years' time, that country will be gone.
Dale Hurd, CBN News, reporting from Sweden and Denmark.
Thanks, Dale. Great story. Up next, the unique way a Washington, D.C. apartment complex is drawing in new tenants.
This is a national healthcare alert from the Health Hotline. If you, a family member, or a loved one suffers from knee pain and have Medicare as your primary insurance, we've got great news. You could qualify for a pain-relieving knee brace at little or no cost to you. Get free delivery, and all the paperwork is handled by our accredited suppliers at no charge to you. If you're on Medicare and have knee pain, don't wait. You may qualify to immediately receive a pain-relieving brace at little or no cost. Friendly agents are standing by 24/7 to help you. Call the Health Hotline right now for details toll-free. Our friendly representatives are standing by now to take your call. We also have other pain-relieving braces available for shoulder, ankle, and your back. You may be eligible to receive these items and more at little or no cost to you as well. Call right now for details toll-free.
Operators are standing by. Call 855-740-8143. That's 855-740-8143. Again, 855-740-8143. That's 855-740-8143.
Millions of Americans with an ostomy live their lives to the fullest every day. And over the last 10 years, thousands have chosen Liberator Medical as their caring and reliable resource for ostomy supplies. Liberator Medical is a nationally accredited Medicare, Medicaid, and insurance provider, so we can handle all your Medicare, Medicaid, and insurance paperwork and billing. And Liberator Medical has been chosen as a preferred supplier by all the leading ostomy manufacturers, including Coloplast, Hollister, Convatec, and Generics. We supply all these leading ostomy brands so you can always get the ostomy supplies and accessories you want and trust. And all of our ostomy care specialists are product certified by the manufacturers. Shipping is free and discreetly delivered right to your door. Unhappy with your present ostomy supplier? Call Liberator Medical and ask about our free ostomy sampling program. We also offer catheters and urological supplies.
Call 1-800-513-3076. That's 1-800-513-3076.
Well, new apartment buildings are always popping up in Washington, D.C.
And with so much competition, one developer is going to new lengths to attract renters. Meet Emmy. She's a 6-month-old miniature English bulldog, and she's the new communal pet for future residents of 2M, a building in the district's northeast neighborhood of Noma.
I was sitting at a cafe one day and I just saw this puppy walking by outside. It was a bulldog, and everyone everywhere just stopped, ran across the street, had to pet this dog. It's not like she can get checked out like a book and taken away and not come back.
Like a community mascot? I could get down with that. I think that would be a nice idea.
Well, residents will be allowed to play with Emmy in an interior park in the building, and they can also let the dog visit their apartment or take her for a walk.
And they can also probably feed her.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Somebody's got to feed her, though.
I would say, I guess they'll take up donations, or
I guess it's a
the
girl,
manager
right?
will.
Emmy's a
Yes,
girl.
yes.
It's a cute dog.
She'll get fed somehow. She's not lacking for anything.
I'm worried about this dog, Mark. We'll
It'll
see
be
you
okay.
tomorrow. Bye-bye.